That, no, I'm not going to talk about that. That hieroglyphics is what you get when you use one of those funny types it said all this, it's just the typeset was different. I don't know how to do that. Let me start right off with, first of all, thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming, and I hope it's a value-driven proposition for you. We'll have some time, hopefully, at the end for questions and answers, and I look forward to any challenges that you may throw my way. My disclaimer is that I am not an economist, not one iota. Okay? I don't have a degree in economics. I've got a lot of hours in economics, and I've participated in economic study for my entire career, 37 years, in the commercial real estate business because it's an integral part of what I do in order to be able to advise clients. Trying to understand money and banking, public policy effects on commercial real estate and everything else. Commercial real estate actually is about a $1.2 or $3 trillion segment of the U.S. economy, and a lot of people don't know that. So it has a role. They are interactive. GDP is a part of it, and it's a part of GDP. There have been a lot of economists here recently. The chairman, the governor of the Kansas City Federal Reserve was just here. I wouldn't pretend to know all the things he knows about economics and the forecasting that they do. And the interesting thing about most of these economists is that they're forecasting pretty good GDP growth and a much sunnier picture for this year in particular, 2011. And I think that's great. They have a great attitude. And when they come around to the subject of commercial real estate, they go, yeah, that's going to be kind of we don't know what to do about that problem. And they don't talk about commercial real estate. They know it's a problem and they don't talk about it. So I want to try to fill in that gap amid the things that they leave out as we go through the time today. So this is the economy the economists aren't talking about yet, okay? Economists measure things from a historical past and try to forecast into the future, kind of like an appraisal, isn't that right, Joe? The comps are always the transactions that they use in order to forecast a future outcome. And I think that's great as long as the economy that you're measuring is the one that you're forecasting. And what I'm going to tell you a little bit about today is that we've shifted the type of economy that we're in. And I'll try to demonstrate that for you. And so are the forecasts that they are making, are they the old industrial economy or are they the new knowledge-based economy? That's kind of an interesting question. I still say that we have problems ahead in commercial real estate. Most anybody that's kind of been paying attention to the news gets that, all right? And so we want to try to drill down into the details a little bit today about why that is. We know there's excess capacity in all the vacancy that's in the marketplace here in Albuquerque and across the country. We keep hearing about a jobless recovery, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There's at least $1 trillion across the country in commercial loan maturities that are coming due over the next couple of years that are a problem. We'll talk a little bit about that. And more government intervention. I just saw something that says we might have something that was created in the 80s debacle in commercial real estate called the Resolution Trust Corporation. So we may see RTC2. That was a non-government, sponsored vehicle to take all the surplus real estate from the failed banks and savings and loans of the 80s and liquidate it. And we may see that something along those lines coming up. I hope not. Take a look at this.
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space with a bit of technical assistance from the crew.
So, here we go. First, an axis for health. Life expectancy from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth, income per person, $400,000, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe. And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, but there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
Well, what you just seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involved plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
So, what'd you think of that?
Great. Good.
Pretty interesting, isn't it? If you couldn't describe or portray the concept of globalization before, for me, that's what it is, right there, okay? And so I wonder, sort of out loud, if some of the economic stagnation we've been experiencing isn't simply because of the fact that other countries are competing with us in a very large way. I think that's possible and probably true to some extent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. It's interesting that he started the film in 1810. 1810 is roughly associated with the start of the Industrial Revolution, which he talked about. And the catalyst, as we would go back in time for the Industrial Revolution, was really the steam engine, okay? We moved from an agricultural world into an industrial world, and the steam engine became the catalyst. And the conduit was the waterways, the highways, and the railways that were built to accommodate all that new mechanization and growth. So the Industrial Revolution, in essence, was increased worker productivity through innovation and technological advancement. We didn't talk about it in those terms, they were machines, but that's what it was. And there was an era shift that took place between the period of leaving this agricultural world and advancing into the industrial world. There was this era shift, and it could have been 20 or 30 or 40 years. Hard to say. But during these shifts, there's economic upheaval. Jobs are lost. People have to be retrained for the new fields of work. Money has changed hands. Things look ugly for a period of time, and then prosperous for a period of time. Sound vaguely familiar to about where we are today? We'll talk about that a little bit too. It was interesting how the population declined there with the Spanish plague in World War I. Contemplate that in terms of the built environment. What happens when people are wholesale gone off the planet? To the economies, to the buildings, and so forth. Think about that, because I'm going to bring that up again too. So it was interesting, he said he's born in 1948, I was born in 1950. Definitely a product of the baby boom, okay? First boomers graduated high school around 1964 and started to enter the workforce. Some went to college and then came later and entered the workforce. And this is an interesting number, 68 to 80, 30 million new jobs were formed in the United States, while the Fortune 1000 lost manufacturing employment. So those were white-collar jobs, the office sector, the retail sector, the service sector, whatever you want to call it. And those were the baby boomers coming into the workforce, okay? I was graduated high school in 1968, found my first job part-time and started college at the same time. And there were lots of us, and there weren't a lot of jobs. We had to kind of elbow our way into the workforce, slow but sure. And think about the expansion of the built environment associated with this vast number of people, 78 million people moving through time, okay? Had to have housing as we began forming households, married and kids. We had to have places to work. We had to have places to recreate. Government got bigger. Everything got bigger as this population swell fit itself into the marketplace. And we became a consumer society about that time in the early 80s, right? Easing of credit for the first time. When my wife and I were young, we could barely get a JCPenney's credit card with a $200 limit, even though we both had jobs, gainfully employed. In the 80s, everything changed, all right? And as us boomers particularly started buying things, VCRs and all kinds of gadgets that were on the market in those days, everything swelled. The manufacturers swelled, the distributors swelled, the retailers swelled, okay? And it went full circle. The consumer bought, and it was all through credit. Everybody borrowed to expand, all the way along the cycle. So we've been used to that pattern of increasing debt for 3 decades. And now we're sort of bumping into ourselves. The deindustrialization of the U.S. economy, it's not a term you hear too often, is the next era shift, all right? Got to start in the late 60s, as I just said, through the early 90s, and the basis of it is the mainframe and personal computer. It was later added on to the main conduit was the information superhighway, and that's where it is today, growing at an exponential rate. And the world of work is changing. It's changing in very, very dramatic fashion, and it affects the built environment. In the 80s particularly, there were public policy changes. Congress changed some tax laws in 81 and 86 that helped create the boom of overbuilding and helped break the boom of overbuilding. And it was based on the idea that we were going into this information age, and we knew from those jobs that were formed in 68 to 80 that we were becoming this white-collar society, and so let's build office buildings sort of made sense. The problem was the monkeying around that Congress did fueled the fires. The depressive times and the high interest rates of the 70s and the inflationary trends of the 70s sort of said, we've got all this pent-up money, we need to do something. So banking regulations started to loosen. Loans became easier. All of this stuff sort of fueled this overbuild. And then the Tax Act of 86 came along and took away tax shelters and did a whole lot of other negative things. And the market went bust. The difference in that period was the economy was okay. All right? We just had overbuilding that we couldn't absorb fast enough. Today, it's not like that. And again, we're going to talk about this. I'm setting up this whole talk for that. So, other effects on the built environment. Mergers and acquisitions. When corporate America merges, two companies merge, the first sort of net effect is One of them has a much bigger balance sheet P&L, all right, because that's the resulting company. But the first thing they do is they get rid of redundancy, okay? I don't need 2 receptionists, I don't need 2 copy room persons, I don't need. And when you reduce the workforce and pare it down to those that you need, generally you reduce the amount of real estate that you need. This has been going on for 3 decades, all right? We know about technology advancements and improved worker productivity. Motorola and General Electric in the industrial sector were among the first to adopt Japanese quality improvement methodologies, Six Sigma, Kaizen, ISO 9000 kinds of standards. So they were able to do more, or at least the same amount of work, with fewer people using adaptations of new technology and a lot of other intellectual advancement. We talked about globalization. You saw the effects of that. Free agency. I'm a real estate broker. I am a free agent, although there's a fee that comes with me. But I'm a free agent in the sense that you see free agents in athletics, okay? There are lots of free agents today. A guy named Daniel Pink was the speechwriter for Vice President Gore when Gore was in office, and he decided he didn't like that kind of life, and he was a pretty good speechwriter, so he decided he would go out on the circuit as a free agent and sell his services for speech writing, and he wrote a book called Free Agent Nation around 1999. It's a little interesting how he was forecasting the change in technology, if you read that book, go forward. The idea that we go to work for somebody for 30 years, we all know in this room, I think, ended a long time ago. And so increasingly people are becoming the intellectual property that they have as individuals or what companies are going to be buying. So consultants and advisors and more of these sorts of free agents might be the norm of the future. And you have to contemplate how that's going to affect the built environment. Telework and telecommuting, we know a little bit about. It's very difficult to find statistics on how many people are actually doing that because the government, as one of the measurers, doesn't know how to measure it. Is it somebody that works at home once a week, all week, and there's no art or science to it yet. We just know more and more people will be doing that. And then virtual offices. Here in the audience is Deb Austin from Office Alternatives. Her business has been executive suites for a number of years, and increasingly over the last few years is the addition of virtual offices, which are people that don't take physical space, but that she sells a variety of services to. And isn't that interesting? Some of these are corporate, some of these are local people like you and I. It's all over the map, and that business is growing, isn't it, Deb?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. New workforce.
The question is, will we have the skilled workers necessary to be able to meet these challenges? To manage this complexity, this explosion of global GDP? My point of saying that is because of low fertility in the United States and in certainly Europe and Japan, you have the opposite phenomenon than what's happening in the rest of the world. So you've got, and I'll go into this, you've got a youth bulge in the developing countries, certainly the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, particularly India and China, and you've got an aging society with low fertility in the West. Now, you can look at this and say from a workforce planning point of view, this is a perfect storm, but about 50 other industries in the United States and Europe are going to be dealing with the same challenge. So all of a sudden what this means is a huge competition for talent. You're going to be competing with other industries that have the same demographic problem in terms of the future of the workforce. So if you're concerned about the viability of, for instance, even your retirement or the viability of your field as such in an expanding global marketplace with less and less and new entrants from your domestic area, less bodies, if you will, and then you combine that with the challenges of new innovations which require the learning curve of skills for a diminishing workforce, all of a sudden it's a very different kind of marketplace than it's been in the past 20 years.
Less bodies, if you will, is one of the key points of that. The boomers were born about 4 to a family to the World War II generation. As boomers, we produced about 2 kids to a family. So 78 million boomers, only 40 million children. even if the jobs that they presently have as a generational group remained available, okay, there are not enough bodies to fill them in a traditional sense. What does that do to the work? What does that do to the, not only the workforce, but the built environment? So boomers are now at the end of their natural work cycle, okay? I'm 60, I'm gonna work a while longer. Many of us in this room that are in that framework are going to also. But ultimately, we're gonna be out of the workforce, right? We're gonna just be out, we're gonna be dead. You know, we're gonna be cremated or in a coffin, or we're gonna be on a beach or a retirement home, we're gonna be somewhere. But we're not gonna be in the workforce as we traditionally have been. And so with stagnant immigration, okay, the US Congress just can't get there. Both sides just can't agree on immigration issues. And you know what, there's a sidebar to this. There was a period not too long ago where they were talking about relaxing immigration rules so that, what? We could bring the really smart math, science, and engineering people from Singapore and Japan and India and places like that to fill the gaps that our public school system were leaving behind, okay? How are we going to get our work done without smart people? So let's figure out a way to relax it. Well, they didn't do it, okay? Well, now what happens is, because of the internet and technology, you can collaborate on a project anywhere in the world in real time, right now. So if you're an engineering firm and want to bid on a building that's going to go up in Dubai, they've stopped, but as an example, and you want to do the engineering work on that, and you can find people in the world that do similar things that you can collaborate with in all those cities, Japan, Singapore, India, Germany, wherever. And bid on that project, and you can accomplish that work in real time, 24/7, and never leave your office, and never hire another person here in Albuquerque, New Mexico to do that work. How does that fit into the scheme of things? Is that the future? I think some of that is going to happen. It has to happen in a globalized world. We have to compete globally. The boomers are also drunk in debt and downsizing. So what is their buying power in the economy going to be? The evidence, the best non-anecdotal evidence about the problem with the generational difference between the boomers and their children is talked about public policy terms, Social Security. Anybody that has a discussion about Social Security, whatever side of the political aisle you're on, will have to admit that there are not enough people in the following generation to the boomers to pay into the system to keep the boomers afloat, keep the system from growing broke in the future. And that's a good part of the basis of this discussion. And James Canton talked about the diminishing workforce also in a variety of ways. So the jobless recovery, here we go. This is the economists talking now. These guys are, everything's going to be great except we're not going to have jobs. Well, I don't know what that does to you, but from a commercial real estate perspective, it isn't too encouraging, right? Some basic facts about Albuquerque. The last number, 8.8% unemployed, and the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics number I could get, I think it was November, 36,600 unemployed in the metro area, right? I gave a version of this talk 18 months ago in mid-2009, and the commercial vacancy then was 8,700,000 square feet metro-wide in those three disciplines. Year-end 2010, 18 months later, it grew by 1,500,000 square feet. Most of the time, if you have vacancy, it grows because in a vibrant economy, you're building new building product, and you always have new space to fill. We haven't been building buildings. Most of you know that. So the vacancy's growing because people are shuttering their doors, going away, going broke, giving up, whatever it is. And so our vacancy's been growing. How do we fill that vacancy? Well, here's something that I haven't seen anybody else do, and it's just my own interpretation of how to translate vacancy and jobs together on one screen. There's more than anecdotal evidence that this occurs. You can use parking code regulations as to how you fill a building with bodies in parking spaces. They do it in office buildings. It's 1 per 200 square feet as an example. You get one parking space per 200 square feet, and you assume that one parking space equals one person in this market. Okay, and we're not a rapid transit market like Washington, D.C., so it's a little easier to do this here. So over the total vacancy of now 10 million square feet, it's going to take 36,880 jobs or thereabouts to fill that vacancy. Now that's 100% occupancy at that stage and 100% employment at that stage, which you rarely get even in the best of times. But I have to give you an example based on something. If you want to take 3 or 4% and say that's going to be the vacancy rate, and 3 or 4 or 5% and say that's going to be the unemployment rate. That's a pretty natural thing to do, but keep them about the same, because as you see here, the number of unemployed, 36,600, roughly matches the number of people that we need to fill the seats. Isn't that interesting? And so when I go to the job growth forecast that Lee Rennes, head of UNM Bureau of Business and Economic Research, just put out and talked about with the Federal Reserve Governor a week or so ago, her interpretation is that the metro area is going to have 3,100 whole new jobs this year against that number we need. And then she braved herself and said, we think it'll be a little more in the next year, and we think it'll be a little more in the year after that. And they're hesitant to go beyond that because why? There's too much upheaval in the world. Anything could break out, anything could happen, and it's not realistic to project beyond that. But year in and year out, when times are good, we only really have about 1.5 or 2% job growth anyway, and that's kind of what this is. So if in your minds, hopefully it's starting to emerge that we have a protracted vacancy problem using this kind of analysis. It's going to go on for a while. And another issue with these jobs are all of these traditional, this was based on traditional jobs, people getting in a car or riding a bus and going to a building somewhere like we've done for the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. Are all of these jobs going to go in those kind of buildings? Are some of them going to be telecommuter, free agent, mobile, virtual office, those kind of jobs? And I can expect that some of them are going to be because of the way technology is changing things. Deb Austin's business is rising in virtual offices. Fascinating, isn't it? So does that slow down the growth? If we were happy about 3,100 jobs filling up buildings, does that give you another kind of uneasy feeling that not all of those are going to go to fill up the vacancy? Retail space. Everyone knows about Amazon. Have you heard about Etsy? Has anybody been to Etsy? Etsy? Okay. My daughter-in-law sells something called snack sacks, various size, reusable Ziploc bags in decorator colors with a Velcro closure, rewashable, coolest thing I've ever seen. And there's a website called Etsy, and it's designed for small business entrepreneurs just like this, okay? Where she can go on there, pay a small fee out of what she sells in her little homemade products, and has all the work taken out of building that website. From the ability to pay, the ability to order, the ability to scan what her product inventory is, and there's lots of people there with her in her company. So it's beginning to be a new form of internet marketing for our entrepreneurial world that we live in. Does she need a space? Working right out of her house. Working right out of her house. What's that do for the retail market? Industrial space is probably the biggest conundrum that I can express. And the reason why is my discipline has been primarily industrial for 37 years, okay? I haven't got a clue what's going to happen in the industrial market. There's a reasonable expectation that we all still are going to have some goods that we need. Goods have to be made or imported. They usually have to be stored at least transitionally, temporarily, moved about, and that sort of thing. There's not, you know, the recent article said Albuquerque area has lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs in the first decade of this century, 2000 to 2010. 10,000 manufacturing jobs gone. Are they coming back? Jim, are they coming back?
Not anytime soon.
Not anytime soon. We're not a manufacturing economy anymore. This is the deindustrialization of the U.S. and it's affecting us. We were never really an industrial economy to begin with. A lot of the industrial space in this marketplace has been occupied by people associated with the construction industry. Our economy, if it's not government driven, is driven by housing construction and commercial building construction, and there's a lot of little contractors that have little industrial facilities, and there's construction industry suppliers, you know, the guy that gets the heater from the factory somewhere or the wholesale house and he stores it, and then the contractor comes over and picks it up and takes it and puts it in the new house he's building that. And those guys are kind of dead, and that's attributable to a lot of the vacancy that we're now seeing in this market. So unless there's something that we're not understanding about how the markets are going to recover generally, I'm not too optimistic about the industrial space market right now. Hopefully it'll get better. And think about this, in all of these categories, there are companies that have hung on by doing what? They've pared down their employment base, They're not abandoning their leases, they're paying their rent somehow or another. Many have adjusted their rents with the landlord, some still have that to go. So when they start hiring again, it doesn't automatically mean an increase in occupancy because they've already got space that needs to be filled. So the first wave goes to the people who already have space, the tenants that already have space, or the building owners, and then the next wave goes to the landlords and the people that are trying to sell their buildings. So that's another lag in the improvement of commercial space vacancy. Absorption analysis measures growth in total occupancy from the beginning to an end of a period, usually a year. When I talked about 1,500,000 square feet growth in the vacancy a little while ago, over the last 18 months till the end of 2010, that's called negative absorption in real estate vernacular, and it's not a good thing. One way to examine the office and industrial market as an example is to do absorption analysis. Now there's less agreement about how much space we absorb on average year to year. Some of the folks that I kind of reconnoiter with say we average about 250,000 square feet a year of office space absorption year in and year out over a period of time. Some years it might be 400,000 or 600,000, some years it's 0 or negative. So if you take it over a long enough period of time, probably it averages about 250,000 square feet. Simply dividing that into the current vacancy gives you a 10-year supply based on traditional way of occupying space. 10-year supply. Think about that job number, 3,100 jobs split over 3 sectors. You know, if 1,000 jobs went into the office market as an example, how long it's going to take to fill out space? 2.5 million square feet. Industrial, about 7.5 years. Retail, somewhere in that same time frame. So the effects of all this excess supply in the commercial real estate sector on value, you've got extended vacancy periods, you've got a lot of downward pressure on rent. Why is there downward pressure on rent? If I'm selling widgets and Roger's selling widgets across town, and he's been in his space 10 years and I've been in mine, it's a new building, got kind of at the height of the market, thought we were going to be okay, don't mind paying a little extra rent. Now I'm paying 30% more, 40% more than he has. So on a company's P&L, right, 2 biggest cost items on the expense side are wages, cost of labor, and the cost of occupancy, whether it's an owner occupied with a loan or whether it's a lease. The cost of those are the 2 biggest things. Now, most people are going to agree that our cost of labor is going to be about the same because we're doing the same kind of business activity. But if I'm paying 30% more for my occupancy cost than he is, how can I stay in business against him, particularly in the weak market conditions that we have? So it's going to cause me to go to my landlord and say, hey, if you want to keep me from going broke, you're going to have to lower my rent. And if my lease is short enough term, I'll just put up with it, and then at the end of that lease, I'm going to the old space market where I can negotiate a better deal. And think about this. I mean, there's 39 million square feet or so of industrial space about, right, Jim? 39 million in the city that we measure. The last couple million square feet are the ones that are built during the bubble years. So they're the highest rents, okay? And then there's a period of stability before that, and there's a couple million square feet, and that's not quite as high rents. And then the other 33 or 4 million square feet is the old rent market, okay? Those are low rents, okay? That's where the pressure in the market comes from. Even real estate appraisers have trouble understanding how to value in the future based on what? We don't have any comps. That's the current complaint. We don't have any comps. We don't know how to price anything. Well, you do. Because if I'm in business and I'm going to rent a space or buy one, it's got to match up to what the market says. And the market is that 34 million square feet that I'm competing with, okay? That's what it is. And it's hard to find that information, but that's what it is. And I'll argue to my death about that. I don't know if you want to argue with me. We'll talk about the question and answer period. That's the downward pressure on rent. And when you have downward pressure on rent, landlords have to give more concessions to get tenants, to keep tenants. They have trouble paying their debt and expenses. It lowers their return on investment, and it increases their risk of the investment. It goes that way every single time. And with all the government interventionism that's still going to happen. You know, part of our problem today, I think, is because of things like TARP money. That's arguable. But when you start propping up the marketplace from a free market approach, you start having government intervention, it just pushes the problem somewhere else, and it comes back later. I've seen that over my entire career. Never fails. It hurts to say, let things be, and let things crash if they've got to crash. Okay? People are going to get hurt, and on and on and on. But this business of spending and spending and spending and propping and propping and propping doesn't have an end to it. You have to have the free market come along, and the free market's got to do it when it's ready to risk capital and go again. And the uncertainty of all this propping up and all this government intervention is what's keeping that from happening. Is that the best message today of the free market guy? Okay. All right. Banking is still schizophrenic. You have the regulators saying, don't make any bad loans. And you got the politicians, so get the money out the door. We got to do something. It's a problem. And they're trying to work through it. The FDIC and Bernanke and all these guys are meeting and trying to do all kinds of weird things. The interesting thing about the Kansas City, the head of the Kansas City District of the Federal Reserve is he's one that's in opposition to the Bernanke policy. You know, watch that guy, because he might be the bright spot in all of this if he could influence the others in the 12 districts. We talked about globalization and redistributed demand. That's kind of what's been happening in the United States. We've been exporting our manufacturing to other places, and the demand that goes with it is being redistributed. As those countries become more rich and healthy compared to poor and sick, their demand grows too, right? Are we able to export to them? Do we have this balance of trade issue? We have a man running for Senate in the room, Greg Sowards. These are things that he might get to tackle at the federal level once he wins election for that seat in southern New Mexico. Housing glut. All the statistics still say we got 3 or 4 more years worth of a housing problem, right? 3 or 4 more years. No new construction to speak of. Financing all over the place, foreclosure problems, declining values. Sound real estate investing accounts for market forces that help or hinder cash flows like any other business. If you're going to invest and own real estate, treat it the same way you do the business that you own, or your family owns, or somebody that you know that owns a business. It requires cash flow to make it work, and there are forces at work against that real estate or for that real estate, depending on the kind of economy you're in, just like they are for the business. Capitalization rates are something that we use in the real estate sector to estimate value, all right? You take the income stream from a property, the net income stream, and you use a factor to create a value. Income divided by rate equals factor, the ERV formula. It's in very simple terms. However, what's happened in the bubble years is, because of real estate investment trusts, these are organizations that get a lot of money from Wall Street. They're organized to acquire and hold real estate for investment, generate cash flows for their shareholders, redistribute those proceeds back in dividends and that sort of thing. It's a business, right? They, most of the time, buy without debt. So they can afford a yield that's way down here, all right? When you have debt, it changes the whole picture about yield and capitalization rates. And that gets forgotten when we get in these bubble periods. And so when you hear somebody saying, you know, I'm going to take my life savings and put a second mortgage on my house and sell everything I've got in stocks and buy one of these wonderful 20-year Walgreens leases at a 4% cap, because that's better than I can do with a money market account, you might want to say, you want to think about that a little bit. Walgreens can go broke. Many companies go broke, year in and year out, merged, acquired, everything changes. So why would you put everything in, all of your marbles in that basket? Now, if you're a real estate investment trust and you're diversified across markets and across countries and across product types, you can take an 8% return there and a 2% return there, and you can do all this kind of stuff and blend it together and come out with an average that makes your shareholders happy. They'll take that kind of risk. These are the guys, because of the loose money that they have, that drive the bubble first. And the rest of us kind of follow on to that, thinking, well, gee, real estate's getting pricier, but gee, if I buy, I can turn that for a profit. And that hit the housing sector, and it hit the commercial sector. And cap rates are still way, way, way wrong, as far as I'm concerned, with the risk factors that I'm trying to point to today. Most brokers think a 7.5 or an 8.5 cap, and I don't expect some of you who are not real estate people to follow all that, is fine. I think cap rates below 10 make no sense. And I will advise a client every single time to contemplate how long that vacancy is going to occur, how much concession they're going to have, so on and so on and so forth. And that cap rate business has an inverse relationship. The higher the cap rate number, the lower the price. The lower the cap rate number, the higher the price. So if you're a buyer of investment real estate, you want the highest possible cap rate you could achieve, because it's going to bring the price down and it's going to improve your yield to go with the risk that you're about to take. A lot of risk, okay? Take a second. I like to show this. One of the first things I was given, one of the few things I was given when I was taught real estate as a 22-year-old right out of UNM, was from a guy that worked at Rauscher Pierce, an old securities firm. He was a broker, stockbroker. And he brought this little pamphlet called Speculation as a Fine Art. And it was by this guy, D.G. Watts, who was a well-regarded stock investor in the late 1800s, and he's the one who wrote this. And it makes as much sense today as it did when I read it for the first time in the early 70s, as probably when it was written in the 1800s. Okay? What happens in these bubble periods is that people just start lining up with their cocktail and their dice and putting their money down and rolling. Not a lot of thought that goes into gambling, is there? Speculation is a calculation of risk. It's understanding some of the things that I put up here today in a very broad way in order to measure whether or not it's worth doing. Okay? So you mitigate your risk by speculating in the right way. And what happens with regulators is very often they go, well, there's too much speculation. No, there's not. Speculation is legal. Gambling is illegal. Okay? Almost all business is more or less speculation. We rely on speculation in a free market world. So it's when people believe that speculation crosses over into the gambling range, then it's no longer speculation, but they use that term, and that's wrong. Speculation is speculation. It's a certain degree of calculation that goes into, along with these other features, the qualities, essentials, and equipment of a speculator that make the difference. Innovation economy. And I'm done.
It's the bits, atoms, neurons, and genes. These are the new building blocks of not just the next level of science, but the next economy, the next industries, where the jobs are going to come from, where the applications and products are going to come from. And some of them are starting to produce tremendous opportunity today, but let me drill down a little bit more on them. 4 key technology buckets are converging. This comes out of a National Science Foundation study that I'm a co-author of, called NIBIC technologies, or convergent technologies. Nanobio, IT, and neuroscience. The collision of these 4 technologies together is creating an entirely new global marketplace, but also is creating new kinds of disruptions that, quite frankly, are very hard to be able to map.
Now what? So, have your thoughts been changed any today? Good, bad, or indifferent? Please give me some feedback. Thanks for coming.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
When you mentioned the cap on real estate, or I forget the term.
Capitalization rates.
Capitalization rate. Okay, now I've noticed that in rental properties, my daughter came to Las Cruces and was looking for rental properties, and I've always held that property that's worth $100,000 should rent for $1,000. A property that's worth $200,000 should rent for $2,000. Isn't that what it was in the past? Isn't that the historical rate? And it seems to be aligning with that. Now again, it's getting down in that direction much more, because there's not the added speculation that it's going to be worth more next year. Because that's not in the market anymore. That's not a factor. It used to be if you could just pay the interest on a house, that you could come out very well in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
You could just pay the interest.
Well, I was brought up under an umbrella of what was called prudent investing. And so if you're going to talk about real estate as investment, whether it's a home, and I think residential realtors historically have made a very broad mistake by saying your home's your best investment. Well, you know what? I mean, you don't buy and sell your home to make a living like you would stocks or bonds or any other kind of thing. And yes, it's a great hedge against inflation. One of the interesting things about real estate investing, as a sidebar, is people will plunk their money down on stocks, fully expecting they may lose everything they've got tomorrow. You put it in real estate and it only goes up. How does that work? Only goes up if you, but that we know, over 37 years, I can tell you, it doesn't only go up. So prudent investing involves what? Measuring against other investments and having some diversity in your portfolio so that you don't get these wild swings, all right? And as far as your analysis, you're probably kind of doing comparisons to what you used to call like the passbook savings rate, which was the least amount of risk of putting your money somewhere and getting a return on it. I don't know, I'm not familiar with the way you did that. If we don't factor in these kind of market forces, and it's hard to put a number on that kind of risk, but there should be a number, and we don't factor in the cost of debt because we're obligated to pay it, and we don't factor in something for the use of our money, you know, the investment, the 20 or 30% we put down should have a return on that part. That's prudent real estate. It's comparing against these other features of investment in the marketplace that we should do. Yes, sir.
It would seem that city and county governments ought to be sweating bullets in that if they're trying to project future budgets or project anything, the tax base is going to be eroded because if you're going to have the vacancy factors and rents go down, what have you, unless you have a very ambitious county assessor and you have another tax thunderstorm and lightning or whatever, you know, it ain't going to be too far out that we're in trouble.
The way we calculate property values is kind of a weird thing. On the rise, when the values are going up and they're collecting all this dough, is there a corresponding increase in county and city services? No. No. They might raise up salaries or add a few programs that then have to be sustained in the future, which is difficult. But when values go down, you're exactly right. How do you sustain all of that if your basis for collecting revenue is on the value of the property? And there are a lot of guys now and gals making a living protesting property taxes to try and offset that sort of stuff. This gentleman first right there.
So within your NOI, your vacancy factor traditionally, it seems like it was about 7%. Has that vacancy obviously gone up? Would you have a vacancy factor that's a lot higher now today than, and what has that gone up to?
Well, there's no standard in the marketplace yet because it hasn't figured itself out. If I was advising a client today,
you're saying 10%.
I would say more than that. Okay. If I'm advising a client on an office building purchase because of the risk of the delayed vacancy and the downward pressure on rent, used to be we'd pro forma the whole thing at a 5% vacancy.
Are you saying AAA credit as well?
All of the above. If I've got an office building, take a 100,000 square foot office building, and it's got a 20% vacancy, I'm going to base my whole pro forma on that 20% vacancy, period. Because look at how much competition I've got to fill up 1 square foot in that building against the entire rest of the marketplace. 20,000 square feet against that entire 2,480,000 square feet of other vacancy that I'm competing with. I've got a long protracted period. My investment's got to be based on that, not some mysterious 5% pro forma. It doesn't work. And my risk associated, so I'm buying down my risk some by using numbers that are realistic. These are real operating numbers, okay, against the threats of the market. And I'm also going to boost my cap rate because of the risk associated with it.
So if you have a multiple tenant type of, you know, you have a 360 unit apartment complex compared to a one tenant Target superstore, you know, how is your value or your vacancy differentiated? So is there more vacancy because of multiple tenants?
I think you mitigate your risk of real estate ownership when you have a multi-tenant building over a single-tenant building.
Right,
Okay?
I agree.
Okay, and so it depends on your threshold. If you're a big, giant real estate investment trust flush with cash, and your market is many single-tenant buildings, you know, across the country, well, when you lose one of them, well, it's not a big deal. That's your diversity. But when you're a little guy and you got everything in that one basket, that's the problem. So a multi-tenanted building where you might lose 20% of your occupancy is better because you're not losing it all at once typically, and that's kind of what's happening in the
You may
market
have the
today.
same vacancy over the holding period.
Sure.
It's just that when you've got a single tenant building, you're vacant right now all the time.
All the time, right, and it
So it
hurts.
affects your cash flow more than the vacancy.
Right.
And TIs to,
All of the above, concessions, tenant improvements. Most real estate investment analysis doesn't even take into consideration the holding period adequately.
right.
Okay, so when are we gonna have vacancy, what do we gotta do to retain the tenant or get a new one? Tenant improvements that have to be made, commissions that have to be paid, how long is the rent loss gonna be from the vacancy that we have to sustain? And what's our holding period, is it 10 years, is it 5 years, is it 20 years? And how many events of those are we gonna have? How do you measure all that? Well, it's kinda measurable, they used to use the internal rate of return analysis for that, but it's got some holes too. But my point about speculating is that you try to take into factor all of those things in your consideration. So, yes, sir. Right there.
The Obama administration has created and perpetuated the greatest environment of uncertainty probably since the early 30s. The healthcare legislation, cap and trade, tax uncertainty, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. Are there other factors outside of all of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that make up the reasons for the vacancies, or is that pretty much it?
Well, I mean, part of the vacancy is because of the changing nature of work. So we do more, you know, economists measure it as increased worker productivity is measured in we can do more with fewer people. And when you have fewer people needed, you have less real estate needed. And so that trend's been going on for 3 decades, and it's going to do nothing in my estimation except continue. I mean, even in the industrial sector, changes in the way the logistics supply chain occurs using technology, barcoding, robots that go and pick something off a shelf, put it on a conveyor, it comes around, it's shrink wrapped, another little deal picks it up, puts it on the truck. Where were the bodies involved? One guy sitting at a little computer in the little warehouse office doing all that when it used to be 4 or 5 in a big operation.
So you think that's more of a factor than the fact that corporations are sitting on more cash than they ever have in the history of this country?
Well, the cash will get freed up when they feel that the capital is worth risking. And so, in a globalized world, first, now we have to start thinking differently. See, we have this kind of arrogance about us Americans, and and I'm just as guilty as anybody. We don't think about all those other countries that have been creeping along right next to us. We only think in terms of, we won the Super Bowl. Well, there's only us in it. Different when we talk about World Cup soccer.
And it still took 2 hours to score.
Yeah, exactly. So everything about our economy going forward is different than what we've been measuring. We've been measuring based on an industrial economy, and we know it's not that anymore. And we know demand is being redistributed outside our borders, okay? And we know that production is being redistributed outside our borders. And we have to start thinking about those things in political terms, in economic terms, who we are as business entrepreneurs or individuals with our little savings account or whatever it is, because the world is different going forward. That's what that one video at the beginning tried to portray. He's in healthcare, I'm in real estate. Here's a guy, a budding politician, we got a CPA. It affects all of us. I mean, just because he was a healthcare guy doesn't mean that stuff doesn't apply. Roger.
Vic, I think the cash accumulation that was just referred to is one element that's not been discussed adequately to think about absorption of capacity. I agree, we've got tremendous capacity that's built up that's going to take a while in a conventional sense to absorb. But historically in these cycles, particularly in the local market, what we've seen is small business and innovation be the precipitator of the freeing up of that cash and the absorption of that capacity. And an example might be not speculators or investors in real estate, but a new business that needs a new facility for a very specific application that didn't exist 10 years ago or 5 years ago or even a year ago. And I guess I'd have to tell you, I'm a little bit more optimistic that while we look at this model in the way that you are, what's on the horizon is already being experienced today in our local marketplace. Because people have to make a living, they have to pay for groceries.
Right.
We've got some very bright people that are unemployed right now that are doing some very creative things to solve their particularly unique problem.
I don't disagree with you at all, and I don't mean to downplay that, because it can get a little doomy and gloomy in some of the things that I said. Part of what I'm trying to do is get people to be a little more cautious about their approach to real estate investing particularly, and how the economy is going to lay out while we go through this transition. Absolutely, there are people that are using innovation and new technology and bringing things to the marketplace we haven't seen before. And hopefully, we're getting some of that in New Mexico. What we're seeing in our little real estate office is a lot of downsizing. We're not seeing too many people take space for the first time in an entrepreneurial sense to start a new business. What we're seeing are those contractors going, yeah, I used to have 20 people, now I got 6, and I gotta shrink a little bit to stay in business. Getting a few licks here and there, you know. So we're still seeing transaction business, it's just not the kind that has that positive, you know, trend of entrepreneurial growth. I'm convinced it's coming. I think if the forecast, if the economists are saying 3,100 jobs, well, those are some kind of jobs that we haven't got right now, and it goes into some sector, whether it's the old sector or the new sector, I don't know.
Is that a
That's
first
a
year
positive.
of recovery? Is that a first year of recovery? Is that a bottom? You're
Don't know.
saying? I mean,
They don't know, and I don't know. I just know that if we need 36,000 jobs to cure the problem, we only got 3,100 coming, we got a problem. That's the point. Deb?
So one of the things that I see in my business is very optimistic, lots of startup companies, but they use space in a totally different way. So it's a social and cultural change. Our expectations have changed dramatically. None of us want to drive downtown and park our car and sit in a cubicle in a high-rise. It's not what our kids aspire to. It's not what we aspire to for ourselves. So we're using technology and space in a dramatically different way. I host 150 companies out of 10,000 square feet. That's what the virtual office is about. It's about using the technology and the space in a totally different way. People come together to collaborate, to meet with each other, and then they go. And they don't want to pay the overhead, and they don't need to. So it's just a different way of thinking.
So those are jobs, and they're generating revenues.
Well, it even goes beyond that,
Yeah.
Deb. I think, I just had a discussion with my staff this morning about the fact that we interact with our customers and our vendors digitally more often than we do personally. And we have a growing body of employees and vendors and suppliers and customers that don't want to see each other physically. It's too expensive, it takes too much time, it's unproductive.
Right.
So we use Skype, or we scan documents and share them with a speakerphone conversation, teleconferencing, or whatever the case may be. That is innovation in and of itself that helps fuel these kinds of changes that we're talking about.
Got it. I agree. Thanks, Joe. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Vic.
Jim?
The lady's comment down here, I think, is right on from the idea that we're gonna see a transition. You've used that term transition, saying, and I don't know if you meant it in the concept, we're gonna get back to the way things were, or we're gonna end up into a whole new world.
New world.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, new world. We moved from agriculture as the basis of our economy to industrial machinery and production to this new information technology age kind of thing. And one of the things I picked up here recently is we're now in something called Web 2.0. Web 2.0. That's the social media revolution. That's Facebook, okay? That's Web 2.0. 3.0 is being discussed in very scientific, graphic terms. I saw a great little video, and there's just one room to put it all in here today. But social media and Web 2.0 is still a bunch of disconnected things trying to interact, find their way. Okay? Web 3.0 puts it all together in one big package. Fascinating Search on Google, Web 3.0, take a look. Okay, that's the new economy. That's what we talked about at the end, the innovation economy. We don't know how to map it. It's just coming. We know it is. And my point is that if we don't have traditional jobs, if we have new jobs, if we've transitioned to some other way of working, how does that affect the built environment? And therefore, how does it affect your investment in real estate? Yes, sir.
Well, let me just add one more thing to the end of that, because I look at your numbers on industrial space and manufacturing space, and I keep wondering in this new world, maybe it's time that we converted these buildings into something totally different.
That's what's happening.
Yeah,
Now
the
you're talking.
idea is, let's take a look at the future and let's accommodate that. Quit thinking we need a manufacturing company, maybe we need something else.
Thanks for the lead-in. One of the things I've been talking about is, in some of my other versions of this, is adaptive reuse. And if some of you need to get out the door, please feel free to. Adaptive reuse. So where are the boomers who've been using all the space headed? Well, kind of headed to apartment living and assisted living and senior living and hospitals and I don't know what. But if you take an office building that no longer has the demand from the marketplace and it's sitting there, what do you adaptive reuse it to? Well, maybe it's an assisted living center. Okay, it has to be bought at a really great price in order to go through that conversion. And if there's no demand for it in the form that it's in, that price ultimately is going to get there. So, and I'm not saying there isn't any demand, I'm just saying that that's something that you have to kind of look forward to. Especially, it crosses the lines of the industrial market, crosses the lines of the retail market. It's all of the above.
When back in the
Yes,
question,
sir.
that would be the last question.
Okay.
It's not a question, I'm just trying to add something. We saw that leap towards technology a few years ago. We had an IT company that operated in Syria, which is a third world country. And the only space that we had was a small apartment with tables and plugins into internet, and the employees were groups, like teams, works from their homes or come to the company to plug in their computers and work. And the performance eval was based on their productivity, not their presence in the company. The company used to operate 24/7 without anybody there. So if you see this in a third world company or country, you can see how things are changing throughout the whole globe towards a new kind of industry, and I think it's the new era that we need to admit that we have to deal with.
So if I interpret what you said right, you're right with me, aren't you? Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. You've been used to living in a virtual world that many of us here in the United States, because of the way our economy has evolved, has been slower to come to, but that's where we're headed. I agree. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, you said that was the last question, but
Okay, fine, go ahead.
I might got the answer before even raising the question, but I need to confirm that. Today, many real estate investors are saying that today's price value of the real estate investment are in the bottom line of the curve, and they are looking forward that it will jump up again. But according to the data you are providing today, we are not so optimistic about that. So
listen carefully, because the news is going to be, the economy's picking up, this is a great time to buy. And all of what I said today works against that for a while. Now maybe eventually it'll catch back up. I don't know if or when. But for the foreseeable future, the next 2 or 3 or 4 years anyway, there's nothing that says that's going to happen. Without job growth, real estate just stays in the doldrums, period. That is the key. Real estate requires butts in seats, one way or another of describing it, in the traditional sense that we own it, all right? You gotta have that. And so if you start hearing tremendous gains in jobs, growth in the United States, unemployment rates coming down, jobs are going up, then you might want to start thinking about how you're going to analyze your real estate going forward. You may, and my point right now is that we really haven't hit the bottom of the market yet. Brokers are still kind of fiddling with how to adjust value. They don't know how to do that. And so it's a very difficult thing to go to a client and say, you know what, if you really want to sell, if you listen to Vic Bruno, You better lower your price, because that's about the only way to do it with the current situation. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to buy real estate and expect that it's ever going to go down, like I said earlier. We'll buy stocks and it'll go down, we expect that. But real estate's only supposed to go up, so it's a psychological adjustment that has to be made. I'll take your question after because people need to be dismissed, and I'll be glad to talk to you out in the hall. Anything else, Paul? Thank you.
Thank you for coming. The Rio Grande Foundation, by the way, is an example of what Vic's talking about. We are a virtual organization, and at one time we had 5 employees. It always depends on the number of grants we have and the money we have flowing in. But I have to say that I'm more productive in a virtual environment. I think that's something else that maybe is a future presentation, talking about productivity and the ability to go within mere steps from work to play and back again, and use your schedule the way you want to do it, not 9 to 5 in an office, etc. But anyway, thank you, Vic.
Thank you.
And yeah, he'll take your questions, and we'll wrap up now. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Thank you. Thank you for what you said. Thank you. That's excellent.
So we may have virtual desks, but I don't think we can have virtual beds yet. We can still look for bed space.
Did you see Avatar?
I guess you're right, I haven't.
Oh, it's an interesting movie.
How's everything down?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I told her, I said, you need to get Heather a job that she can't refuse.
Yeah, right. Keep her out of the way.
Well, nice to see you. Tim, nice to see you. Do you still have that other side? No, actually at all points. I still have the handle at all points for it. I just always enjoyed those. Well, a lot of people did, and it is. It was fun.
Uh-huh.
You're in the
It will go up at riograndefoundation.org. I can't guarantee when, but check back probably by the weekend. Uh-huh. Yeah. It'll just take a few days because I have to do it all myself in terms of uploading it.
So we'll be able to watch the whole thing over?
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah, just go to our main website. Oh, once it's up, it's up. It'll be on the internet forever.
RioGrandeFoundation.org.
Uh-huh.
Okay.